Never fear dying, said the great preacher Charles Spurgeon. He continued that dying is the last but the least matter that a Christian has to be anxious about. Think about that for just a moment, that for Christians, death is the last trial, but it's the least to be feared. The question is, why and how can we have that same hope together? In the year 1678, John Bunyan's classic, The Pilgrim's Progress, was published. It was 6 years after his 12-year imprisonment for his faith. And now, interestingly, it was within the walls of prison where Bunyan wrote it. And this book is about a man named Christian who allegorically plays the role of all followers of Jesus. And so Bunyan takes us on a journey with Christian as he faces trial after trial, the same trials that many of us face. And so he encounters the swamp of despond and the valley of the shadow of death. He comes across characters in the book like Mr. Worldly Wise Man and the giant Despair. You see, Christian is just a little glimpse of what we all go through. In fact, Paul did say to a brand new church in Acts chapter 14 that it is through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. Now, I'm going to spoil the ending of Pilgrim's Progress since it is 347 years old. And as you approach the end of the book, Christian and his friend Hopeful are about to enter the celestial city. Their pilgrimage is almost complete, but they have one last trial they have to face, and it's death itself. So in allegorical fashion, they come to the river of death where there is no bridge. And here's how Bunyan tells it. Now I further saw that between them and the gate was a river, but there was no bridge to pass over it, and the river was very deep. At the sight of this river, the pilgrims were bewildered. But the men said to them, "You must go through the river, or you cannot enter in at the gate." So the pilgrims then began to inquire if there was any other way to the gate, to which the men answered, "Yes, but only two, since the foundation of the world have been permitted to tread that path, namely Enoch and Elijah. Nor shall any others go that way until the last trumpet shall sound." The pilgrims then, especially Christian, began to lose heart. They looked this way and they looked that way, but they could find no way by which they might escape the river. And then they asked the men if the waters were all of the same depth. "No," they replied. "You shall find it deeper or shallower, just as you believe in the king of the city." And so the pilgrims approached the water, and upon entering it, Christian began to sink. Crying out to his good friend Hopeful, he shouted, "I'm sinking in deep waters. The billows are rolling over my head. All his waves are washing over me." So Hopeful replied, "Take courage, my brother. I feel the bottom and it's firm." Christian then cried out, "Ah, my friend, the sorrows of death have compassed me about. I shall not see the land which flows with milk and honey." With that, a great darkness, a great horror fell upon Christian so that he could not see ahead of him. He also in great measure lost his senses so that he could neither remember nor talk coherently of any of those sweet refreshments which he had met with along the way of his pilgrimage. But all the words that he spoke still tended to manifest his horror of mind and heart fears that he would die in that river and never obtain entrance at the gate. Hopeful, therefore, labored hard to keep his brother's head above water. Yes, sometimes Christian almost drowned, but then in a short time he would surface again, half dead. Hopeful would also endeavor to encourage him, saying, "Brother, I see the gate and men standing ready to receive us." But Christian would answer, it's you that they're waiting for. You've been hopeful ever since I've known you." "And so have you," responded Hopeful. "Ah, brother," said Christian, "surely if I were right with him, with God, then he would now arise to help me. Because of my sins, he's brought me into the snare and he's left me." Hopeful reminds him, "My brother, You have quite forgotten the text where it's said of the wicked that they have no struggles in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not troubled as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. And he tells him, these troubles and distresses that you were going through in these waters are no indication that God has forsaken you. Rather, they are only sent to test you as to whether you will call to mind what you have received of his goodness and live upon him in your present distress. And then I saw in my dream that Christian was in deep thought for a while. Hopeful then added this word, take courage, Jesus Christ makes you whole. With that, Christian cried with a loud voice, oh, I see him again. And he tells me, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you go through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. So then they both took courage. And after that, the enemy was as still as a stone and could no longer hinder them. Christian, therefore, felt firm ground to stand upon and found that the rest of the river was but shallow, and thus they both crossed. Hopeful was hopeful. Christian was terrified, but they both made it to the other side of the river where they were safe with their Savior forever. So death was the last trial for them, but in reality it was the least to be feared. Perhaps you think that you'll be more like hopeful when death arrives. Or maybe you think you'll be more like Christian. But if you are a follower of Jesus, your outcome will be the same as theirs. Not because you are good and strong, not because you have power within yourself to overcome death, but because of what Jesus says in our text this morning. In verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And Jesus asks us this question in verse 26. Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus himself is the resurrection and the life? And that because he is, if you believe in him, when you die, you'll live. In fact, you'll never really die at all. Well, this morning we have a story where Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and Jesus brings him back to life. And I want us to meditate on Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life. All of our hope for life is found only in him. And so as we look at John chapter 11, we'll notice several things that are going on. We're going to see Jesus' motives. Then we'll see the people mourning. Third, we'll look at Jesus' miracle. And lastly, we'll listen to his message. First, Jesus' motives. When Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, everything that he does in this passage is marked by love. Love for the Father and love for people. I'll show you. We see his love beginning in verse 3 when Martha and Mary send messengers to Jesus. And it says this, so the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now notice, the messengers didn't say the man's name. They didn't say, Jesus, Lazarus is ill. Because apparently Jesus' love for his friend was so obvious that he could be identified by just saying, he whom you love. Martha and Mary thought in their mind, if they just say that, then he'll know who we're talking about because Jesus has great love for Lazarus. And then Jesus responds to these messengers in verse 4, and we see his loving motives again. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. See, Jesus' motives are on the Father being glorified here. It's more than just a miracle. He wants to act so that the people see glory and God receives praise. And then look at verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. That's different than simply saying Jesus loved them. Instead, each person is mentioned by name. Jesus loved Martha. Jesus loved Mary. And Jesus loved Lazarus. Isn't there a difference between a father who says, I love you guys, to his kids, and then personally telling each one of them that he loves them? So when's the last time that you have considered Jesus' love for you? That he not only loves the church, but he loves you as an individual member of it. That he loves the flock, yes, but he loves each individual sheep that make up the flock. And when we think about God's love for King's Church, yes, it means all of us, but it also means each one of you. But all of this really comes to light when you read verses 5 and 6 together. It says this: Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Jesus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. It's strange. Jesus knows that Lazarus is sick now, but he waits 2 days before going to see the family. And at first glance, that might seem sort of insensitive. It might actually come across as unloving. Mary and Martha have just sent these messengers. Lazarus is about to die, and Jesus waits a couple of days. I mean, surely if he loved them, then he would have dropped everything he was doing and gone immediately, right? But that's not what John says. John says that Jesus loved Martha and loved Mary and loved Lazarus. Verse 6, so, in other words, therefore, because he loved them, he stayed 2 days longer. Apparently, he waited specifically because he does love them. And his waiting here is an act of love. Now, maybe that's so the people would believe. Look at what he tells his disciples starting in verse 11. He says, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. They don't get it. And Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. So then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So he's glad that he wasn't there. He's glad that he waits 2 extra days so that they would believe. And right before he raises Lazarus, he tells Martha in verse 40, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And before he raises him, he also prays to the Father, and he tells us why he prays in verse 42. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. And so the delay here has its purpose, that the people would believe, and the people would see God's glory through Jesus raising a dead man. You see, waiting these 2 extra days would make the miracle absolutely undeniable. Because whenever you factor in travel time, he would now be arriving to Lazarus when he's already been dead for 4 days. There actually used to be some superstitions about resuscitations that could happen, that would be possible up to day 3. And so with this approach, he's actually doing what will be the best for everybody's faith, so that they would undoubtedly and ultimately see Jesus as the resurrection and the life. And if he's doing what's best for their faith, if he's doing what's best for their eternity, then he is doing what is most loving. So here's what we can't conclude. We cannot conclude that Jesus waited selfishly or insensitively or unlovingly. And we can't conclude that today either, that just because we don't seem to understand why he delays, we can trust that he does it because he loves us. Even when it's hard to understand, John says Jesus loved each of them, so therefore he stayed for 2 extra days. The motives of Jesus are rooted in love. But sometimes it can be hard to see it that way, can't it? It can be difficult to trust Jesus' character when our circumstances are painful. It can be hard to trust Jesus' care when we go through trials. Like Christian in the river, it can be easy to lose sight of Jesus' love whenever we're faced with death. And if that's you, like me, then we can relate to the mourners in this passage. They're professional mourners. We're introduced now to Martha, Mary, and these professional mourners, which sometimes in this culture were called wailing women. And they were there to professionally grieve the loss and to comfort those who were grieving. So let's look at how each of these folks respond to Jesus. We begin with Martha in verse 17. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. And so when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And so in Martha's case, when Jesus comes to her, she says, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." And that may sound like a complaint at first. Jesus, why did you wait so long? If you'd been here, you could have stopped this. But I think we need to be fair to Martha because she is grieving. And she goes on to express trust in Jesus in the very next verse. She says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." But even still, she doesn't seem to think that Jesus will actually raise Lazarus at this very moment because he tells her that Lazarus will rise, and her mind goes directly to the resurrection on the last day, not the resurrection to life now. So that's Martha. Next we get Mary and the mourners. We pick up in verse 28. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" When Mary talks to Jesus, she says the same thing that Martha did. "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." And the mourners there at the inn also say something similar. "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" So what are we to make of this? It's possible that Jesus' motives are in question here. Maybe these remarks have a little bit of a bite to them. Jesus, why is it that you weren't here? Why did you wait 2 days? And even still, that would in some way say something remarkable about their faith. Because one thing's for sure, Mary and Martha and the mourners are all in universal agreement that if Jesus would have been there, he could have certainly stopped Lazarus from dying. They know and believe that Jesus is powerful. I mean, he healed a blind man. Surely he can keep somebody from death. The question is, can he revive somebody from death? They all believe that Jesus could have prevented it. But in their minds, once death happens, there's nothing that even Jesus can do. There's no hope. All throughout the book, Jesus has performed remarkable signs. He's turned water into wine. He healed a paralyzed man. He gave a blind man sight. He fed 5,000 people with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He walked across the water as though it were dry land. So surely Jesus could do something like prevent death. But could he do something once Lazarus has already died? Is even this too late or too difficult for Jesus to do? Hunger, paralysis, blindness, all those things can be reversed. But what about the last enemy that everyone in this room has to face? Death. Can Jesus do something about that too? Church, if you struggle to feel and know and trust the hope of Jesus over death, Jesus cares deeply about that struggle, and he wants us to have hope. And we see that here. Notice, after Mary's conversation, verse 33 says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Something similar is said after the mourners question. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, same word, came to the tomb. Now that term, deeply moved, actually means indignant or angry. It's often used in the form of a rebuke. And so in some way, Jesus is emotionally and physically bothered in this moment. Church, not at the death of Lazarus per se, because he knows that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And he knows that he's doing this all for the glory of God. Jesus is deeply moved here by their lack of hope and their unbelief. I find it interesting. In verse 33, it says he's deeply moved. In verse 35, he weeps. They still say, yep, but couldn't he have prevented it? And so we go back to verse 38 where he's deeply moved again. So we have deeply moved, followed by weeping, followed by deeply moved. And here we see that there's this emotional complexity in Jesus that is astounding. He's not just some stoic monk that's in a monastery somewhere. He has compassion for our pain and grief over our lack of hope. You see, if all he does is weep with us, but is never moved to get us out of the pit, it's useless. It's a bunch of tears with nothing to look forward to. And if he only tells us to shake it off without sympathizing with our weakness, it's cold and it's hard-hearted. But if he hates to see us without hope and he cares about what we're going through, then he is stirred up to act on our behalf. He acts because he cares when we're in pain, and he acts because he cares that we're hopeless. So friends, when you doubt and fear and lack hope during any trial, but especially in the face of death, Jesus cares, and he goes to great lengths to show us again and again and again just who he is. So maybe there's times where you wonder if you're alone in your grief, or alone in your doubt, or alone in your seemingly hopeless situation. But Jesus cares even about your lack of hope, and he's moved to show himself faithful. In this case, Jesus performs a miracle. The first half of John's gospel is often called the book of signs. And this sign, this miracle in chapter 11, is the last and the greatest of them, of course, until we get to the very end when Jesus raises from the dead. But here Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. We begin in verse 38. Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." And Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Now, to be sure, Lazarus was dead. John goes to great lengths to leave no doubt in our minds. This is not some magic trick. It's not some illusion. This is real life. In verse 39, it says, Martha, the sister of the dead man. The same verse says that he's been dead for 4 days. Verse 44 says, the man who had died came out. And so Lazarus is dead, but Jesus tells Martha that she is going to see the glory of God. And then he prays so that the people would hear and believe, and then he speaks. 3 words, and a dead man comes to life. See, Jesus not only raised him to life, but he did it with a command. He didn't do chest compressions. He didn't have medical machinery. He simply commanded, "Lazarus, come out." And if that doesn't show you the power of Jesus' words, I don't know what else does. As the old saying goes, if Jesus had not specified Lazarus by name, all the tombs would have been empty. It reminds me of John 5:25 when Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live." 3 verses later, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who've done good to the resurrection of life, and those who've done evil to the resurrection of judgment." Now, Jesus isn't raising Lazarus up for judgment like he will on the last day, but he is showing us that he alone is the one who has the power to do it, that he is the one with power over life and death. So let's pause and let's consider the weight of this for a moment, that our greatest enemy is death. It is the great equalizer. The rich and the poor are the same when they take their last breath. The strong will one day close their eyes and be the same as the weak. All the great and powerful people throughout history are no longer here, and it's because they met an even stronger enemy in death. So our greatest enemy that can never be defeated by us is overcome by 3 simple words out of the mouth of Jesus. Every Christian in this room is alive because Jesus called you by name. See, when God saves a person, he uses our human proclamation of the gospel, but then he calls a person by name out of the grave. We are walking miracles, which means that you might even have people in your life that seem like a lost cause, but they are no more a lost cause than we were. With man, it is impossible, but with God, he only has to say, "Sinner, come out." And so we've seen Jesus' motives, we've seen the mourners, we've seen the miracle. Now let's go back in the story where we see Jesus' message. Jesus didn't do miracles for the miracles. He did them for the message. They're called signs because they signify something about Jesus. And he tells us in verses 21 through 27. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And as we mentioned, her mind goes directly to what was current day Orthodox belief. Of course, Jesus. Of course, I know that he's going to rise again on the last day when everybody rises. What did Jesus have to do with that belief? The Pharisees even believed this, and they hate Jesus. And so what did Jesus and life and resurrection have to do with one another in this context for Martha? I love what Jesus says next. He takes the attention actually off of Lazarus. We think we're talking about Lazarus, and he takes the attention off. He takes the attention off of the last day, and he turns the attention to himself. And here's how he responds to her in verse 25. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" The topic is no longer Lazarus, it's whoever would believe in Jesus. The topic is no longer the last day, the topic is now. The topic is no longer resurrection in general. It's the one who is himself the resurrection. So in order to live, Lazarus and Martha and Mary and the mourners and you and me need Jesus because he is the resurrection and he is the life. So when Jesus performs the miracle in Lazarus, he's letting us all know that what he did for Lazarus, he can do for us. He can do it for our soul and for our body. Believe in Jesus, and though you were dead in your sins, you will be alive. And though your body will one day go on the ground, your soul is going to be present with the Lord. And yes, one day he will call your body again, a simple command. And everybody will rise, reunited with their souls. And those who believe in Jesus will live forever with him in the new heavens and the new earth. If you don't believe in Jesus, death is not the last or the least trial to worry about. It's not even the greatest trial to worry about, because there is an even more terrible reality on the other side of death. The Bible says that it is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of a living God. But for those who come to Jesus for life, death is the last, but it's the least matter to concern you. Jesus asks you, do you believe this? Can you say with Martha in verse 27, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world"? Jesus is the resurrection and the life. That is the message here. But not all responded with faith. Instead, a conspiracy begins to take shape. Starting in verse 45, it says, "Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, 'What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation.' But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it's better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish.' He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. And so from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Jesus, therefore, no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim. And there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, 'What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?' Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know, so they might arrest him." There seems to be a great irony here that the miracle in which a dead man is raised leads to a plot to make Jesus a dead man. And Caiaphas ironically prophesies, doesn't he? He says it's better for Jesus to die for the nation than for the whole nation to die. And what he means is not what we might think he means at first. What he means is that Jesus is gaining so many followers, and people are going to want to make him king. And if they do that, the Romans are not going to like it, and they're going to shut down the whole Jewish system. And so Jesus needs to die so that the nation will live. Caiaphas spoke better than he knew, didn't he? Because Jesus did come to die so that people would live. He came to die so that the punishment of death would be paid. But here's the question. If Jesus came to die, would he still be able to defeat death then? He raised Lazarus from the dead, but what about when it's his body that's laying in the tomb? Well, as we know, 3 days after they crucified him and plunged a spear into his heart, Jesus rose from the grave. As he told us in chapter 10, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again," because he is the resurrection and the life indeed. You can't kill life. See, when he rose from the dead and later appeared to his disciples, Thomas wasn't there. And so Thomas, of all the disciples, after Jesus raises from the grave, struggled to believe that Jesus was actually alive. And so I just want to close by reading from John chapter 20, which I think puts a bow on everything that's been said this morning. "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came, and so the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe.' 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. And although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' And then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe.' Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Church, which is us. How are we, those who have not seen Jesus like Thomas did, going to come to believe and be blessed? And John tells us in the very next verse, that's why he wrote this book. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.